I want to talk about the psychology and the politics of prejudice, understanding prejudice and discrimination as perennial evils, both globally and in ourselves. And we want to develop new programs to combat and prevent prejudice thinking and discriminatory actions. We're going to focus that we all have a dual mentality. Some of us compassionately care for other people. At the same time, we fear anyone who is different from us. Many of us, as you see today, beginning to spend our lives helping other people, while we know around the world there are people whose job it is to harm other people. So I want to go back in history and then go through, combine historical and political events with research that I did and my colleagues have done. But again, the dark and light aspects of human nature, which are in all of us, are our yin and yang. We all have the potential for evil, and we all have the potential to be everyday heroes. So we're going to look at some of the origins of evil, of fear, of prejudice, and violent action against those who are viewed as threats to our personal well-being and also to national identity and our pride. Our journey starts in the Middle Ages with the Inquisition. The Inquisition was a dispositional analysis of evil. Whenever anything went wrong, when the crops failed, when a young child died, when somebody was killed in an accident, the question was, who was responsible? And in those days, they said it was the devil's action. But the devil can't act on humans, the theory was, so the devil would sleep with certain women who were witches. So then the question was to find who the witches are, get them to confess, and then to undo the evil. And this started what I call the Witch Identification and Destruction Program. But again, it also started a deep-seated prejudice against women, because witches, by definition, were always women, never men. The other thing that happened was, many of these, of course, all of these women were innocent. Typically, they were women living alone, older women, and they said, we didn't do anything. And so they said, you must confess. And they developed torture techniques. There are museums around the world where human beings spent much human intelligence building machinery of torture to get innocent people to confess. And for me, this was human creativity diverted to evil means of inflicting harm and terror on innocent people. That was then, but in 1994, the Hutu government in Rwanda declared that their neighbors, Tutsis, were cockroaches. That's the word they used. And the government said, your job, if you're honorable Hutu, is to kill those cockroaches as if they were infecting your home. And in only 100 days, that's a little more than 3 months, 800,000 Tutsis were murdered. Not with guns from a distance, but with machetes and clubs, beaten to death. And after they did it, the killers showed no regret. And in fact, in this article, one of the women said she and other women rounded up the children of the villages they perceived as enemies, and with gruesome resolve, they said they bludgeoned the children to death. The children didn't cry because they knew us, said the woman. They just made big eyes, and we killed too many of them to count. And then she said, we were doing a favor to them because they would be orphans, because their fathers had been butchered with machetes and their mothers had been taken away to be raped and killed. So this is a horrible, from the Middle Ages to recently, evil spreading throughout the world. There's a wonderful book called Faces of the Enemy by a man named Sam Keane. And he says, in every nation around the world, before they go to battle, they find an enemy, and they need to have propaganda, typically visual propaganda on the media, on posters, that gets the people to hate the enemy and gets mothers willing to send their sons in battle to kill the enemy. So some of those images are, this is the enemy. The enemy as greedy, hungry, who's going to come and take all your goods. The enemy as the enemy of your God. And in fact, more evil has been done around the world since the Inquisition to now in the name of God, rather than religion should be exactly the opposite. Because most religions want to believe we are the only true religion, and therefore any other religion is a false religion, and we must stop people believing in that. And then, of course, the enemy will come and take and rape our women. So these are reasons to hate the other, and these are reasons why young men have to join the army to kill the other. There's a wonderful novel by William Golding, maybe in the 1950s, called Lord of the Flies. And in this novel, young boys, British boys, choir boys, good boys, their ship crashes and they're on an abandoned desert island. And what happens is, at the beginning, the good boys rule. All the children, whether big or small, have an equal voice. Democracy rules. And then they run out of food. And the only food on the island is wild pigs. And a group of boys say, we will be the hunters. And they go to kill the wild pig. And they can't do it because killing is against one of the 10 Commandments. So what the author does is he has these boys, take their clothes off, paint themselves with berries and mud, change their appearance, and now, once they are anonymous, they not only kill the pigs, they enjoy killing, and then they begin to kill the other boys who challenges them. So after I read that, I had my students read it, and it was really a book about the destructive power of anonymity. Anything that makes you anonymous means nobody knows who you are. And we, on the one hand, like in Mardi Gras, in festivals, you change your appearance to have one night of fun, one night of pleasure. On the other hand, we use anonymity to do things which are antisocial and evil, as you'll see. So I did an experiment at New York University many years ago to show that if you make people anonymous, I call it de-individuation, take away your individuality. So women, college students, came to the laboratory, and we said, you're going to meet two women who are trying to be creative under stress. Their job is to be creative. Your job is to give them stress. And the stress is you give them an electric shock anytime you want. And then what we did is we gave them a sample. Wow, and it was really a powerful shock. And then what happened is we're going to compare, so there were 10 groups of 4 women who were de-individuated, 40 women, and then we compared them with 40 other women from the same class who were made to be individuated. They had to wear name tags. My name is Marcella Weinstein. My name is Cynthia Jackson. So everything is identical, and we say you're going to meet 2 women one at a time, and your job is to give them stress. What they see in front of them behind a one-way screen is me and the first of 2 victims. So they hear me interviewing her, and then we say, now we begin. And at any point, the participants in the study put their finger down, and they could hold it down as long as they want. So the measure was how long did you give her shock? Now, they really weren't getting shocked. They pretended. They were actresses. But they were screaming and turning and twisting. And then they lifted up their finger. A light went off, so they knew to stop. And they did this for 10 minutes with one, and she left, and then another one comes in. So this is women giving pain to other women because an authority figure said it's okay to do it. The question is, does it make a difference if you're anonymous or not? So here's the data, and the data is, this is the shock duration, how long they kept their finger down. The more you keep your finger down, the more she's jumping and screaming. And they had 20 opportunities to do this. So we're going to look at first 10 trials and the second 10 trials. So initially, the women who were individuated gave much less shock and the same low level throughout. The women who de-individuated began on the first trial giving twice as much, And what happened is, over time, they gave more and more and more. So here's a powerful demonstration of simply making somebody anonymous and some authority giving you permission to harm someone else. You take that permission and you use it in this horrendous way. So again, most terrorists are anonymous. It's the anonymity of terror that's frightening. And so another question is, does it make a difference if warriors go into battle, changing their appearance before they go in, or not? So researchers looked at some cultures around the world where we know warriors go to battle, they don't change their appearance. In others, they do. Or like this, or what we do in every nation, our soldiers are made to be anonymous. We put them in a uniform. Uniform means what? The same. In America, soldiers used to be called G.I. Joe. G.I. means government issue. You're not a person, you are an issue of your government. So in this research, they looked at 23 different cultures, and they had evidence from these cultures that in 8 of them, they didn't change their appearance. In 15, they did. But the measure was, did they kill, mutilate, or torture the other enemies? And in 10 nations, they were low on this, and 13, they were high. So the question then is, if they don't change their appearance, they don't do anything horrible to the other soldiers. However, simply changing your appearance, painting yourself as in The Lord of the Flies, or being in a uniform or costume, or in some cases a mask, 12 of 13, almost every one of those nations, killed, tortured, mutilated the enemy. So how else can good people be seduced into evil deeds? Through the process of dehumanization. So we're saying now, you could change yourself by being an anonymous, by being de-individuated, by being in a mask, but also you can think of the other as an animal, less than human. So for me, dehumanization is one of the most basic processes in mass murder, in genocide, in using rape as terror, and in prejudice. If you have a cataract on your eye, it blurs your vision. But I say that dehumanization is a cortical cataract. It's on your brain, and it blurs your psychological vision that you don't see people who really are very much like you. Now you see them as different. And this operates at individual level, but also at societal levels. So let's consider how systems create evil through propaganda and perversion of education. Because you want to begin at the beginning. You want children at the very young ages to learn how to hate. So we're going to create faces of the enemy for citizens to hate and for soldiers to kill. So we're going to create stereotypes that dehumanize and degrade not an individual, but a whole culture, and a race of people that leads to their destruction. And not only you feel no guilt, in fact, you're doing it with pride because you're doing it for your nation. And so the question is, how do we transform obedient school children? We want our children to be obedient, pay attention to the teacher, to follow the rules. But we want to transform them now into blindly obedient Nazi youth in the 1930s and 40s. We want them to believe that this man, Hitler, is the Führer, is their God. And so we're going to have young people want to be like him, to emulate him, to dress like them. But the way they did it was the Minister of Education in Germany created comic books that all students had to read. And these comic books was like the dirty Jew is like a evil fox. So the Jew as evil or a comic creature. And children were required to read this from the first grade throughout all the grades. And here they are. Here's a picture, actually, of children reading this book. So what is in the book? This is a lesson on geography. And so you see people around the world. In the middle is the devil. And on the devil's back, on a close-up, the little white things are Jews that travel around with the devil. And then this is a picture of the dirty Jew who is stealing wheat and flour from the Germans. But the most important thing was they wanted to compare men of the Aryan race, brave, strong, with ugly, dirty Jew. And in the comic books, this is what you would see. For example, here's a Jewish man trying to seduce an Aryan woman while her daughter stands. His son is ashamed, and the children have to watch this. Here's rich Jews walking in the park, and in the corner you see a boy, an Aryan boy with no shoes. Here is a landlord, Jewish landlord, kicking out old man and a little child. So these are extreme stereotypes. So there's a whole comic book you read, and then each grade, as I said, is different images. So when you read this, at the end, it's reasonable for every child to say, it's good to kick Jews out of your school, restrict them to ghettos, send them out of your country, concentrate them in slave labor camps, and then in the end, put into practice the final solution. And so that's the book's end. Here's Jewish German children happy that Jews are being kicked out of their school. It says Jews not allowed in our park. And then in the end, kicking Jews out of Germany. But that was the beginning. Because then what happens is the next steps. You round up the Jews, you put them in concentration camps, you put them in Auschwitz, in concentration camps in many countries throughout the world. And even more, in Poland, the police reserve from Hamburg was sent as mobile killing squads because some Jews lived in rural areas, so it was not easy to round them up. So they said, just go where they are and kill them. We don't have transportation from rural parts of Poland into concentration. So these men went, and there's a book called Ordinary Men, and it documents historically, day by day. And at the beginning, the commander said, if you don't want to do this, you don't have to. And at the beginning, half the men said, I refuse. I can't do this. I can't kill women and children innocent. And by the end of 1 month, everyone, 100%, are killing, murdering Jews. And then in the end, it's the final solution of killing 6 million Jews.
When I learn of incidents such as the massacre of millions of men, women, and children perpetrated by the Nazis in World War II, how is it possible, I ask myself, that ordinary people, who are courteous and decent in everyday life, can act callously, inhumanely, without any limitations of conscience? Now, there are some studies in my discipline, social psychology, that seem to provide a clue to this question. The problem I wanted to study was a little different. It went a little bit further. It was the issue of authority. Under what conditions would a person obey authority who commanded actions that went against conscience?
So this is Stanley Milgram, and you should know he and I were high school classmates when we were 14, 15, 16 years old. And he was a Jew, and this is 1948. It was not that long since the war, and he wanted to know, could he and his family end up in a concentration camp? And other kids said, Stanley, don't be stupid. That was the Nazis. We're not like that. And he said, how do you know what you would do until you're in the situation? He said, I'll bet they said the same thing. And then he did the famous research on blind obedience to authority. But again, the important thing in that message is, here's an authority that gives you a command that goes against your moral conscience. Obviously, you should say, no, I'm not that kind of person. I refuse to do it. And so in this study, as you know, there's an authority figure in a white lab coat, and there's 2 men. One is going to be the teacher, one is going to be the learner. And the teacher has to give the learner something to learn. When he makes a mistake, he has to press a button on the shock box. And there are 30 switches, starting with 15 volts, increasing by 15, 30. So when it gets to 100 volts, the learner is screaming, please, I have a heart condition. I don't want to go on. In every case, the teacher turns to the experiment and says, I don't think I want to continue. So it's not right. And the experiment says, I'm sorry, you already took your payment of $4. You must go on. So they dissent, but they do not disobey. And the question was, how many ordinary people, and Milgram tested 1,000 men, no college students, ages 20 to 50, how many would go all the way? When he asked psychiatrists in the Yale Medical School, they said only 1%. To do so would be psychopathic. In fact, as many of you know, 2 of every 3 American men in that study gave 450 volts, which is really enough to kill another human being. And so Milgram asked that question. If Hitler asked you, could the Holocaust happen again? And the question is, 65% of these 1,000 adults administered 450 volts. They blindly obeyed authority that went against their conscience. So what are the real-world parallels? I mean, that's just an experiment. The real-world parallels are, in 1978, in the jungle of Guyana, 912 American citizens committed suicide or were murdered by their family and friends because of the blind obedience to their leader. And the leader was a man named Reverend, a priest, Jim Jones. He was the reverend of something he called People's Temple, which existed in San Francisco and Los Angeles. And he said, it's time we all committed revolutionary suicide. And he gathered them all together, and either they took a drug, cyanide, women and children, and 912 did this. So it was horrific. So this is what we call a modern-day Lucifer effect. So dehumanization as moral disengagement. My colleague Albert Bandura at Stanford said, you know what? You can do it with words. You could semantically change perception of the victim, of the evil act, of the relationship of aggressor to the aggression. And so clearly what you want to do is get good moral people to disengage the morality. As if you're driving, you're going to put your car in neutral and you're going to coast. And during that time, when your morality is disengaged, you now can do really terrible things to other people with authority tells you so. So he did this interesting study. He had a group of Stanford students, and essentially he said, the experiment is what they overheard was students from the other college are here. They're here for the study of group problem solving under stressful conditions. So the Stanford students thought this is what it was about. And they don't know who the other students are, but they're college students like you. And in one condition, what they heard the assistant tell the experimenter, the other students are here, we're ready to begin. That's neutral, you don't know it. In one condition, he said, they seem like nice guys. That's a humanized condition. But in the third condition, he said, they seem like animals. And that's the dehumanization. These are students, other students. The assistant is telling the experiment, they seem like animals. What is the basis? So you don't even know why they said that. But just that word, nothing, dehumanize, and humanize. And now in the study, you have a chance to give electric shock, supposedly to see how creative they are. And the results I'll just very quickly, over 10 trials, where they are simply told they're animals, they start the same level, but over time they give more and more and more shock, almost the absolute maximum possible. And the good news is, where they humanize, they give significantly less. So the message is, anything you do to make the other into a person like you, they're similar to you, they're nice, they're friendly, there's something positive, brings out the best in us. Anything you do to make the other seem like less than human, a subhuman, dehumanized anyway, brings out the worst in us. And again, these are college students at Stanford University, bright, intelligent, normally ordinary good guys and girls. It was both men and women in the study. So in my beloved America, let me go back. We enslave people. We tortured them. We lynched them, hung them from a tree, and in many cases, we burned them alive. And when they did that, whole families posed in front of, as you'll see in a moment, in front of the people hanging from a tree or burning alive. And what was interesting is they took pictures, and they sent the pictures to the friends and family, and those pictures were the start of the postcard industry in America, because the post office made so much money selling these stamps. There's a book called 100 Years of Lynching. This went on for 100 years. So these are brutal murders of black Americans by white Americans were facilitated by dehumanization processes of racism. And again, the photos are called trophy photos. So here is Saturday night in some town in America where people are celebrating, and this man is pointing. And the question is, what is he pointing at? He's pointing at two black men being hung from a tree. And it says in the corner, Marion, Indiana, August, I guess, of 1938. So they took a picture and they put it on, they sent it to their friends. Oh, you missed a great time. We hung two black guys from a tree, you know, or we burned them alive, or we hung them. And this went on, as I said, for 100 years. I did a study following up Milgram's study. I'll go through very quickly the Stanford Prison Experiment. And we wanted to see, could good college students from all over America who happen to be in the Stanford area in the summer, could simply making them think of putting them in uniform, which made some feel they're guards and some feel they're prisoners. They all knew it was an experiment at the beginning, but in a very short time, people who are playing the role of prisoner have to be shown that they have no power. The role of guards is to show that we have dominant power and you have none. So you're going to begin to dehumanize them. They're going to begin to be only a number. And in very short time, so the prisoners were given a number and they became that number. Guards were in military uniforms with symbols of power. And in a very short time...
In 1971, Phil Zimbardo conducted a revolutionary experiment here in the bowels of Stanford University in the United States. It rocked the world of psychology. A group of students were divided randomly into prisoners and guards and lived in a makeshift jail. The prisoners immediately became submissive, and the guards became cruel.
You're not only not getting a cigarette, but for as long as the cell's blockaded, you're...
Within a week, Phil Zimbardo's prison was inhumane, and the experiment had to be cut short.
In 36 hours, now, before we did the study, we gave clinical interviews, we gave personality tests, and everybody in that study was normal and healthy. In 36 hours, a prisoner had an emotional breakdown, crying, screaming uncontrollably. And each day thereafter, another prisoner had the same reaction. So in 5 days, 5 prisoners who were chosen because they were normal and healthy had extreme emotional distress and had to be released. And at that point, the study was supposed to go for 2 weeks. I had to end it because it was now completely out of control. So again, it's an experiment. What is it? So when you do an experiment, the question is, does it relate to anything real in the real world? And we call that external validity. Does the results of an experiment, which is always artificial, does it show any meaningful extension in the real world? And in fact, so here's our guards bringing prisoners who want to go to the parole board to plead to be released. And the guards on their own put bags over the prisoner's head, put chains on their feet while they were waiting to go to the parole board. We now go to Iraq, American soldiers putting bags over prisoners' heads, chaining them together. And in this prison in Iraq, called Abu Ghraib prison, we realized in 2004, we saw images of the horrible things American soldiers were doing to Iraqi prisoners who were, mostly Muslim, who didn't speak English, who were, in many cases, naked because they didn't have uniforms, and all the abuses happened on the night shift. So one of the images of horror throughout the world is this image of a man a prisoner with a bag over his head, standing on a box, and the idea was a stress. You stood on a box until your legs gave out, and then you fell off. But what they told him was they put electrodes on his fingers, and they said, when you fall off, you will electrocute yourself. Imagine you're in the hood, that your body is now going to give out at some point, and when you fall over, you will electrocute yourself. Now, they thought it was funny because, as you see, the electrodes didn't go anywhere, but he didn't know that. So this is the kind of thing they did for fun. But also, they piled prisoners up naked in a pyramid, and they thought it was funny because nobody had ever done that. Or ultimate dehumanization. A female soldier puts a leash on a prisoner's neck naked and drags them around. These are only a few of more than 1,000 images that these soldiers took. They were proud of what they were doing. They put these on CDs. They shared them with many other people. And I was an expert witness for one of those guards who did horrible things. But what I discovered was, before he went down to that dungeon, he was not only an ordinary person, he was an outstanding soldier. He had many medals and awards. When he was in Kuwait, he worked with the children. He was a good father, a good husband. And when I interviewed him, I said, why did you do that? He said, I don't know. He said, I went down, and these things were happening, and suddenly I was doing the same. He was caught up in the Lord of the Flies. Yeah, they were anonymous. They're all in uniform. And the prisoners were like animals. As I said, they didn't speak English. They were mostly naked. They were filthy. There were no showers. And he said, and I just did what everybody else was doing. Even the pictures, they forced the prisoners to simulate fellatio. And again, took these kinds of pictures. So how do psychologists understand such transformations of human character? There's three ways. One level is dispositional. It's something inside of us. I call that bad apples. The other way is situational. As Milgram studied, as I studied, it's the bad barrel. And the third way is systemic. These are the political, economic, legal forces that create those bad situations that put good people in who get corrupted. And I call that the bad barrel makers. So we're going to see now, I'm going to argue that most of psychology, most of economics focuses on only the dispositional. We believe people have free will to choose or not. And my study, Milgram's study, others say, no. Good people get corrupted, get seduced by being put into bad situations. And we're going to see later on, my conclusion is we can do the opposite. We can create positive situations that put anybody in that come out better than when they went in. So one of the dispositional factors in all of prejudice is something called social dominance orientation. It's SDO. So people who prefer hierarchy in society. They like people to be high, low, middle, bosses. People are high on social dominance orientation. It's shown in research that they are sexist, they are racist, they are politically economic conservatives. Individuals who rate high on social dominance orientation, typically, individuals rate high, they become members of institutions that choose roles that maintain or increase social inequality. They want people to be different, and they will be on the top of that hierarchy. And they want this in business as well as in law. SDO creates a foundation for prejudice of all kinds. Research shows that initially there's a significant link between high levels of SDO and low levels of compassion for others. These are people who can't feel compassion. Increased levels of fear of compassion. You feel people, you don't want people to be compassionate toward you or you toward them. But these are people who have high levels of depression, anxiety, and stress. And they believe in a free market ideology. Now, again, we don't have time, but there's now research shows that you can work to change people's social dominance orientation. And when you do, their prejudice goes down. They now begin to believe more in equality and less in social dominance. So situations have the power to do three things. The very same situation that can inflame the hostile imaginations we've seen to those who become perpetrators of evil, that same situation can also inspire the heroic imagination in others of us, or render most people passive bystanders who are guilty of the evil of inaction. So there's two kinds of evil. There's the evil of action, as we've seen in all these horrible cases, but a different kind of evil is not doing the right thing when you could, not helping other people in need when it would be easy to do so. They follow. One of the problems we have is many mothers say to their children, mind your own business, don't get involved. And we teach in our lesson to say, Mama, humanity is my business. Suppose that was me lying on the ground, or your daughter. Would you not want somebody to help? So we need a paradigm shift needed. We need a shift away in psychology, psychiatry, medicine, religion, economics, and law. The focus, as I said earlier, has always been the medical model, meaning the individual is the solitary causal agent and the target of social change action. We have to switch to a public health model. So when there's a disease, when flu is going around, we switch to a public health model. We don't focus on the individual. We focus on what do we have to do in a whole community. So you recognize systemic and situational vectors of disease, and we're going to develop prevention tactics on a societal level, because the public health evil is prejudice, racism, sexism, political violence, and we see throughout the world bullying, not only in school, but bullying now we see as a problem in many, many corporations. So there are several social processes I call grease the slippery slope of evil. So in the Milgram study, I say all evil begins with 15 volts. When you press that first 15-volt button, you see there are many, many switches to 450. Once you press 15, it's going to be easy to do 30. It's going to be easy to 45. So the important point is refuse to take the first step. So mindlessly taking the first small step is a slippery slope of evil. Dehumanization of others, the way I've shown very quickly but briefly before. De-individuation of yourself, anything that makes you feel anonymous, that nobody knows who you are. Diffusion of personal responsibilities. I'm not responsible, especially if you're in a group. We're all in this together. Blind obedience to authority. Now, again, one of my concerns is in every society we teach children to obey authority. Parents, religious leaders, teachers, political leaders. And in many cases, those authorities don't deserve your respect because those authorities are doing bad things. We saw individual cases here earlier of parents who rape their children or parents who abuse their children. Well, they don't deserve respect. So we have to teach children to discriminate, to make to understand the difference between authorities that deserve your respect and authorities who should promote disobedience, not obedience. And again, young people live to be conform to group norms. We want to be liked by others. We want people to be our friends. So what do? We dress like them. We talk like them. We listen to the same kind of music. We have the same kind of haircut. And you see, when you look at pictures of history, everybody in the 1920s looked a certain way, 1940s different, 1960s, and now. I'm always amazed when I see elegant, rich women, and now in Hungary, the first place, wearing ripped jeans, shredded jeans. I grew up as a poor child. To wear shredded jeans would be an embarrassment. I mean, you're so poor you can't have a good jean. And now people pay to have their jeans shredded. And lastly, it's passive tolerance of evil through inaction or indifference. And lastly, it's accepting an ideology that justifies evil. And this is where political leaders come in. Right-wing leaders are now contributing to the systemic spread of prejudice in their nations. This has been true now in many, many nations around the world, and it's expanding. Many nations, and some people say in Hungary, in Egypt, in Venezuela, and Germany is about to switch toward a more right-wing nation. And sadly, in America, we have this man that there is now, quote, there is recent evidence that America is becoming more prejudiced than ever. And one of the reasons is this man who was elected as President of the United States. The United States is a more hostile place for immigrants, for Mexicans, for Muslims, for African American, and, quote, all outsiders. So a key to these right-wing dictators is what we call exclusionary thinking. They want America for Americans, Hungary for Hungarians, Turkey for Turks. And so essentially, they're saying it's us who are good and them who is bad, and you're going to keep them out. And if they're in, you're going to put them in prison. You're going to not give them work. So again, it's a kind of fixed mindset that, for me, is spreading around the world. Trump's demeaning and dehumanizing action toward immigrants and his censorship of free speech perpetuates prejudiced beliefs. So there's a lot of evidence now being documented that his actions, when there's a conflict between Ku Klux Klan, prejudiced people, and others, he says they're all fine people. So he approves people, he has approved publicly people who do prejudiced actions. And the virus of prejudice infects our children. Here's posters of little children saying, God hates fag enablers, meaning gays. Anybody who supports gays, God hates America. God blew up the shuttle. The shuttle was, a NASA thing. So children get infected. So they didn't make up these signs. Some adult gave them and says, you should parade. In the same way, kids carry things, only white lives matter. One day, and we're almost finished, you will be in a new situation that has 3 paths. Path 1, you will become a perpetrator of evil. You will be the opposite of everything you have heard today and these amazing personal stories being shared, but you will be the other. You will perpetrate evil in some way by racist remark, by a sexist remark, by an ageist remark. Path 2 is you become guilty of being of passive inaction, but go straight ahead and you become a hero. I hope now we already take the path to celebrating becoming ordinary, everyday heroes, waiting for the right situation to put our heroic imagination into action. That's what we are all about here in the Hero Square, in my Heroic Imagination Project. It's how do you get people, especially young people, to want to take that heroic path, be willing to stand up, speak out, and take action to make the world better. Start in your family, in your school, in your community, and ultimately in your nation. And you don't do it alone. Heroes are most effective when they are in an ensemble. We call it a hero squad. So together, you oppose unjust authorities, not by saying, I disagree, you say, we disagree. And at least in a democracy, it becomes a point of view that the authorities have to listen to. Think about it, but then, of course, what we say here in our Hero Square, you are what you do. Heroes do. It's not enough to be compassionate. It's not enough to have empathy. That's nice. Those are nice private virtues. Unless compassion and empathy are transformed, translated into heroic action, that's the only way the world changes for the better. It's by taking action. But action, of course, has consequences. And so you have to be willing to say, I'm willing to take the consequences, but I'm not willing to be a silent, compassionate, empathic person. So I want to end on a positive note. Heroism is the antidote to evil and prejudice. By promoting the heroic imagination, creating an educational system that instills in every one of our children the self-belief, I am a hero in training. I will act heroically when the time comes. So by getting children to think each day, I'm going to do a deed of kindness, a deed of caring, that's really not heroic in the traditional sense. Because traditionally, heroism means you take an action, be aware that there could be a personal cost. In the extreme, you could die. You could lose your job if you're a whistleblower. You could get hurt. So we're not talking about that. We're talking about everyday heroes who each day, in every way, take a little action to make the world better. But we believe, and we have some evidence, that by doing that, by doing the daily deeds of heroism, when a big opportunity comes, when there's an earthquake in Mexico, the people who help, are the people who've been in our program. So I thank you for your kind attention, and it's been a delight to be here today. Thank you.